There's almost nothing you can think of that nobody hates. Nothing's safe, even the color blue. It's especially the popular stuff, which is ironic given the fact that in order for something to be popular, some people have to like it. You know, the opposite of hate, but people like to hate stuff. That's just how hating stuff works, and video games are no exception. We video game fans are passionate people. In fact, something I can bet almost all of you have done is extensively research which games you might like. To which I say, bunch of losers, I spend hours researching games to hate. Hey, somebody's gotta do it. Oh, we don't? Well, I suppose that enjoying games does sound kinda nice. So, in the spirit of such a thing, I'm going to make the case for why 3 different highly touted games that some people say are overrated deserve the praise they get. You don't have to agree with me, but as a suggestion, let's not tell other people what they like and don't like. Because when you say a game is overrated, that's essentially what you're saying. Think about it. Overrated by who? Not you. You think the game should be rated lower. So you're saying it's overrated by those who like it, and you can't stop somebody from liking something. Trust me, I tried to have my wife help me stop liking chocolate so much, just made me like it more. Plus, if you don't like a game, then maybe it's not as highly rated as you think it is. Take a game like Final Fantasy VII. You got the lovers, the haters, everything in between, and the I don't careers. Average it all together, there's no scientific measurements for this sort of thing, but you've more or less got the game's reputation. Some people say that bananas are overrated too, while it's estimated that more than 100 billion bananas are eaten every year. Worldwide, that is, not just by me. Clearly, a lot of people like them. I do wonder, though, I think those numbers could be pumped up a bit if the banana counters took a peek through my window a little more often. First game I want to focus on is The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, or as folks who were never corrected like to call it, Ocarina of Time. I think this is a great game to illustrate how a game can have a target on its back. A high-profile game with lots of incentive for people to take it down a notch, which not every game has. If nobody hates a game, then how popular is it really? For example, if I said that No One Can Stop Mr. Domino is the greatest game I ever played, almost nobody would be motivated to argue with me. Probably not anyone agreeing with me either, but the point is that high-profile games develop a target on their back. Hey, why are people saying that's the greatest game ever if I don't like it? Either I'm missing out or they're all wrong. And yeah, guess which option people are gonna choose. Personally, I'd suggest option C, whatever floats your boat, baby. Not only is Ocarina of Time a game that many say is the greatest game ever, but it's also a Zelda game. Oh boy. Not everyone likes Zelda games, and even among Zelda games, there's a lot of strong feelings about which game in the series is the best, not to mention the 2D Zelda versus 3D Zelda debate. As much as I love most Zelda games, even after all these years, there are still some things that stand out about Ocarina of Time that I think make it great. It wasn't just about the wow factor of being the first 3D Zelda game, it's the distinct themes and settings of each area, and especially the dungeons you go to, often punctuated by some of the incredible music you'd find. Seriously, there are entire channels and series of videos just dedicated to talking about how amazing some of the music in this game is. The Gerudo Valley music and Forest Temple theme are my personal favorites, but almost every song you learn to play on the ocarina is very memorable too. It's not just about how good the music is, but also how it's applied to each part of the game you hear it. When playing this game as an adult, something that really struck me was the sense of weight the story has while mostly staying out of the way and letting you actually play, something I tend to praise a lot of Zelda games for. A good story without being too intrusive. This game starts with a nightmare, a very relatable way of pulling the player into the gravity of the situation, with a very eerie moment later in the game that ties back into it. Also, I swear this actually happened. I had the same dream Link had in my own sleep, which is why I now play Super Monkey Ball before I go to bed. If dreaming about games are a possibility, fingers crossed for some nanner dreams, am I right? Perhaps the biggest strength of this game, though, would be the dungeons, a staple of Zelda games that fans always clamor for more of, and of which this game luckily has a ton of. Depending how you count it, the game has 12 dungeons, with 3 of them being mini dungeons. Given how unique and memorable many of them are, and how it feels like you spend a majority of your time in the game in these dungeons, this is a huge strength of the game and made it immensely enjoyable for me, especially when you factor in the different music in the game. I can't emphasize that enough. Actually, thinking back on it, and yeah, I've talked about it enough. I found the game to move along at a nice pace too, not as tight of pacing as the 2D wonder that is A Link to the Past. Gosh, what a banger that game is. But compared to something like the 100 hours I put into both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I felt like there was a lot of game packed into the 25 hours I spent on Ocarina of Time. Next game I want to talk about is kind of an interesting choice, and that would be Earthbound. This game has had sort of a wild ride when it comes to popularity. It went from being overlooked back in the day with its notably big box that came with a guide and scratch and sniff cards, to then receiving a second wind of popularity years later, elevating it to something along the lines of a cult classic hit, to then having folks hear about this hype, checking it out, and not liking it. Still haven't snaffed or scritched my scratch and sniff cards, by the way, because people say not to. Maybe on my deathbed I'll finally give it a go. Something to look forward to. I think people using the phrase "not for me" makes a lot of sense for this game. A lot more sense than saying it's overrated. After all, Earthbound is a very different game, with one of the biggest reasons why the people who love it as much as they do, being because of how weird and different it is. Besides being an RPG, a genre that can already be polarizing, it's very different from other RPGs as well. Sure, it's got the leave home to save the world vibes going for it, but you know what this game has that most other RPGs don't? A little kid with 2 parents that both aren't dead. Usually at least one parent has passed away in these games. A hero isn't a hero unless they've had things rough, I guess. But besides that, what makes the game interesting is that it's essentially a Japanese writer's interpretation of American culture, with, of course, some low fantasy elements thrown in to give things some oomph. I will say though, while the game has plenty of fictional elements, how do I say this? Sometimes when I play an RPG, I want to feel like a dork with tons of fantasy elements involved. Earthbound scratches a different itch though. While hardcore fans of RPGs might prefer other RPGs over this one, due to more complex battle systems, more serious tones taken, or what have you, it's the unique feel of Earthbound that gives it its appeal. You'll likely either really love it, or just feel sort of mildly unamused by it. Like exercise. I would personally say that the game's battle system has a lot going for it though, even if it's in a different way than other RPGs. The game has a clever way of narrating everything that happens in a way that would almost make sense in real life despite being far-fetched scenarios. Personally, the game felt like a wild fictional take on an adventure I would have had as a kid. Although, as a bit of an aside, I actually found using the player's guide to make the game less enjoyable, at least when using it for every single step. You could use it as a reference, but I found the game to be a lot more fun when trying to figure out everything on my own. That way you feel more like a kid getting up to things, something I can relate to. I ended up on the roof of a school once. I'm not kidding. My mom can certainly verify this. The final game I'd like to talk about is Sonic the Hedgehog, and let's just say the second one, the platforming series that likes to go fast instead of going slow. But the thing is, oftentimes going faster means less control. Does this look like a guy in control? Going too fast when control is required is grounds for the complaint of bad game design, which those who say Sonic is overrated might also say. But what I would say is that Sonic's speedy gameplay just leads to a different type of gameplay, and the games are designed so that you can play them a variety of different ways. You can try to figure out the fastest way to zoom through the stage, you can try to collect as many coins as possible, or excuse me, as many rings as possible. Whew, almost had to go into witness protection for that one. You can also try to hunt down all the Chaos Emeralds so that you can turn into Supersonic, or you can bumble your way through the stage while constantly getting hit and losing your rings. Keep trying, kids, you'll get it eventually. All of the different approaches to the game are aided by the multiple different levels that some of the stages have, being a high, middle, and low path, each of which cater to different playstyles. Sonic games simply don't play like other, more traditional platformers. It actually makes a lot of sense to me why it could be a somewhat divisive game despite having a ton of fans. Also, I think it's fair to say that part of Sonic's appeal is that people just really like the character itself. I don't think I've ever seen a series where people stick with it despite bashing so many of its later games. I've always felt the original Sonic games deserve a lot of credit for executing speedy platformer gameplay the way they did. Most developers won't even try to make speedy platformers, and from what I've heard, it's because the level design is just a lot trickier to get right, not to mention the physics and all that goes into it. Props to Sonic Mania for finally doing the original games proud. Now, there's a lot of points people could disagree with for this video, which games are considered overrated, which games are actually overrated, which games some people criticize as overrated that should have been in this video as actual good games, which end of a banana you should peel it open from. The list goes on, and I'd be open to hearing about any and all of it in the comments. As always, do your best to be civil, as most of you do, and thank you for doing that. So with that, leave your thoughts down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the red